Hello, I'm Rob Satloff, the director of the Washington Institute. Yesterday, I offered some first impressions of the Israeli election results based on exit polls. Today, we have the real results, and we can correct those first impressions. So let me offer 4 observations about what happened in Israel just yesterday. First, don't believe the polls. That violates the Shimon Peres rule of Israeli politics. Polls are like perfume. They're good for smelling, but not for drinking. What we saw yesterday was Israeli pollsters so far wrong that we have to call into doubt even what the poll numbers were showing in the days before the election. Was Bibi really behind by 3 or 4 seats going into the final weekend? Had Labor, in fact, increased its lead so significantly and then overtaken in the last lap by Netanyahu? We don't really know. We do know that important segments of the population seem to have been underpolled, especially the settlers. Keep this in mind for future elections. Second important observation: Netanyahu is a political master. This is not the first time that he pulled the proverbial rabbit out of the hat. Remember 1996? Shimon Peres went to bed as prime minister and woke up only as leader of the opposition. Or even the election in 2009, when Netanyahu did not even win a plurality of seats. That went to Kadima, but still he was able to form the government, a government that lasted 3 years. This time, again, he showed that he was able to come from behind, surprise everyone, and in fact, increase the number of seats his party held in parliament. Up until this weekend, people thought that Netanyahu had been foolish, bringing down his own government, firing his ministers, only to lose the election for which he was responsible. But now it seems as though he has been vindicated, increasing the vote of the Likud, demolishing his former partner Tzipi Livni, and now ready to be a colossus that can form a government with a number of different options. Netanyahu shows that he is indeed the best politician in Israel of his era. Now, point 3. Let's move forward. The real question facing Netanyahu is, what sort of government does he want to make? Before, we thought that we didn't even know who President Rivlin would choose to form a government. But now, with a margin as large as Netanyahu's Likud has, he almost certainly will be the candidate that Rivlin appoints. But what government does he choose to form? Will it be a government solely of his natural allies on the right wing of the political spectrum, perhaps including disaffected Likud voters who voted for Moshe Kahlon's Kulanu party? He could form a government only of those, of the right, Likud, and Kahlon. But in that case, Netanyahu will find himself in the uncomfortable position of being at the left margin of his own government, not somewhere he traditionally wants to be. But he has other options. He could spread one step further over toward the center and bring in the Yesh Atid party of Yair Lapid, who served as finance minister, and Bibi fired him to bring down his previous government. In Israeli politics, you can fire someone on Monday and hire him again on Thursday. Or Netanyahu could stretch even farther. Once he has secured his own 61-seat majority among coalition partners, he could reach out even to the Labor Party, to Isaac Herzog, who ran a very well-organized and well-implemented campaign, raised Labor's vote, and yet shares important policy positions with Netanyahu. According to Herzog, there is no daylight, quote unquote, between him and Netanyahu on the Iran issue, although they have a very different view of how to approach Washington in terms of the negotiations. And Herzog himself is very critical of certain aspects of the Palestinians including their internationalizing the conflict, going to the International Criminal Court, going to the UN Security Council, rather than direct negotiations with the Israelis. Netanyahu has to decide what sort of prime minister does he want to be. Does he want to be prime minister of the mid-60s or so of the Knesset that voted for the center-right and the right? A situation almost certainly which will bring him in loggerheads with key parts of the international community, Europe, even in Washington, and parts of the Arab world? Or will Netanyahu broaden, expand that coalition into the high 70s by trying to bring in center and center-left? Surely as junior partners, but at least into the coalition. If he does that, if he finds a modus vivendi, one which has a new baseline, for example, with the Palestinians, perhaps a baseline on the idea that Israel would build in the settlements, but only in the settlement blocks, and would forswear building, at least for now, outside the blocks, then perhaps there is a modus vivendi he can reach, and he could have a wider government. Which sort of prime minister? This is an unknown. This will be played out over the next few weeks as we see whether Netanyahu is flush with the victory that no one thought he could achieve, or whether that flushness, as it were, dissipates when the realities of politics and strategy begin to impose. Fourth point. Yesterday's victory for the Likud was also a challenge to the United States and to President Obama. If anyone in Washington believed that by stoking tensions between the president and the prime minister, there would be an impact in the Israeli election results, well, the outcome proved otherwise. In fact, as I noted earlier, Netanyahu increased the number of seats his party has in parliament. He will be around for the balance of President Obama's term, barring some unforeseen circumstance. The president has to make his own decision. Just as Netanyahu has a decision, so too does President Obama. Does he wish another 18, 20 months at loggerheads with Israel and what Israel represents, both regionally, America's foremost ally in the broader Middle East, and of course domestically, as elections begin to gear up here in the United States and its own impact for the Democratic Party. Even on the Iran issue, there's a decision for the president to make. Assume for a minute that there is a framework agreement reached by the end of March, and then 3 months later, by the end of June, the I's are dotted and the T's have to be crossed. In that 3-month period, the president has a choice. Does he take this moment to reach out to our allies in Israel, our allies in Arab capitals, and directly address their serious security concerns, reach understandings, specific understandings about what we'll do for their security and what we'll do in case the Iranians break their word? Does he do that now? Or does he keep quiet? Focus on the Iranian talks? Don't do it for fear that this will spook the Iranians away, and try to reach a final deal that he will present to the allies after all the language is complete. It's an important decision. Our allies are going to want assurance. Israel as well. Netanyahu, for all the bluster, for all the rhetoric, for all the politics, came to Washington to say a better deal, not no deal. What will President Obama do now that Netanyahu's position, at least in Israeli politics, has been vindicated? The Arabs, too, will be wanting to hear something from Netanyahu. They'll be wanting to hear on two issues that emerged in just the final moments of the campaign. One on the peace process, and second on the role of Israeli Arabs. In terms of the peace process, Netanyahu said in one of his final statements that the two-state solution is dead. Arabs and America and Europe and the rest of the world are going to want to know, Is this dead and buried forever and ever? Or is this dead and buried only for now, only because of problems with the Palestinians, and that it's conditional on a change in behavior, and that there is a certain set of circumstances in which the two-state solution once again becomes alive, vibrant, and negotiable? Secondly, people are going to want to hear what the Prime Minister has to say on the role of Israeli Arabs. In one of his final comments in the election campaign, he warned his voters that Arabs were voting in droves, so they needed to come out to counteract it. This didn't sit down too well, certainly not with Israeli Arabs, who responded by themselves upping their own participation, but even more broadly in the region. And it didn't go down well here in Washington either. Arabs around the Middle East, others around the world, will want to hear that Netanyahu was speaking to the gallery for his campaign, but that as Prime Minister, he is Prime Minister of all Israelis. Again, just to sum up, key challenge for Bibi: what sort of Prime Minister will he be? Prime Minister for the narrow, or Prime Minister that is a bit more broad? For America, what sort of ally does it want to be? An ally that addresses the concern of its partners now, or an ally that keeps silent until the deal with the Iranians, if it comes to pass, is finalized? Answers to these questions we'll have in the next few weeks. Thank you.